No one expected the question that silenced the entire town hall. The microphone trembled in her small hands as she stood up. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the crowd, louder than any protest or speech that day. Mr. Trump, does God still love people like us? Before we continue, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments and subscribe for more stories that reveal hidden sides of powerful people. Everyone in the room froze. Reporters lowered their cameras. Staffers looked around, unsure what to do. But Donald Trump? He stood there, his eyes locked on the little girl in the second row, her face pale, her hair neatly braided, her dress slightly torn at the edge. Her mother sat beside her, gripping her purse tightly, visibly uncomfortable, almost like she regretted bringing her child to ask anything at all. There was a weight in the air, the kind that only lands when truth collides with pain. And as the silence stretched, people leaned forward, waiting, wondering, what could possibly come next? His expression changed, just slightly, but it was enough. The smirk that usually played on his lips was gone. In its place was something rare, something real. He stepped down from the stage without a word, leaving the host speechless and the security team on edge. The cameras followed his every move as he walked slowly toward the girl. The audience watched in stunned silence. The usual buzz of side whispers and camera shutters had vanished. It felt like something sacred was unfolding, something no one had prepared for. When he reached her, he knelt, not just physically, but emotionally. He bent down to her level, looked her in the eyes, and asked softly, "Why did you ask me that?" The girl hesitated, then whispered back, "Because my father said people like us are forgotten, and you look like the kind of man who would know." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Trump blinked hard, clearly caught off guard by the purity and pain in her voice. But instead of brushing it off, he nodded slowly. And what he said next, no one expected, not even the cameras that kept rolling. He gently placed his hand over his heart and said, "When I was your age, I thought God lived in the sky and only listened to the powerful. But I was wrong. God listens to the forgotten first. People like your father. People like you." The entire room seemed to stop breathing. A woman in the front row covered her mouth, tears forming. Even some of the press, usually stone-faced behind their lenses, lowered their cameras. The little girl's eyes widened. "But why do people still ignore us?" she asked, her voice trembling. Trump looked down for a moment, then lifting his gaze with a kind of honesty few had seen before, he replied, "Because the world listens to noise, not truth. And the truth is, your value is not decided by your wealth, your color, or your last name. It is decided by the courage you show when no one believes in you." A stunned hush fell across the auditorium. No slogans, no applause, just raw silence, the kind that speaks louder than words. And somewhere, in that silence, hearts began to change. The little girl's mother, standing off to the side, covered her face with her hands. She was crying, not out of sadness, but relief. She had brought her daughter here to witness a moment, never expecting that moment would bring healing she herself had needed for years. A nearby security guard, rough and stern in appearance, cleared his throat and looked away, visibly moved. Something had shifted in that room. The energy was different. The people were different. Trump knelt down again, this time not to speak, but to listen. "What is your father's name?" he asked softly. "Marcos," she whispered. "He works in the fields every day, even when he is sick." Trump stood up, turned to his aide, and said without hesitation, "I want to meet Marcos. I want to shake the hand of a real American hero." Gasps echoed across the hall. Reporters frantically typed. Opponents froze. Supporters cheered. But through it all, that little girl smiled. Not because she had met a president, but because for the first time in her life, she felt heard. The very next morning, headlines exploded across every major news outlet. Trump's heartfelt moment with migrant girl goes viral. A little girl's question changes everything. And from politics to humanity, Trump's unexpected answer stuns the nation. The video clip of their exchange had spread like wildfire. Millions had watched it within hours. And for once, the comment sections were not filled with hatred, but with tears, prayers, and stories. People shared their own struggles, their own moments of silence, and the deep questions they had been afraid to ask. Later that week, Trump invited the girl and her entire family to the White House. Cameras captured the moment she ran into the Rose Garden, holding his hand like a grandfather. Her father, Marcos, wearing a simple button-down shirt and worn-out boots, stood beside his daughter as Trump publicly honored him, not for being perfect, but for showing what quiet strength really looked like. That day, politics paused, labels fell away, and the country remembered that sometimes it takes the smallest voice to bring out the biggest truth. As the ceremony came to a close, Trump knelt beside the girl, handed her a small box, and whispered something only she could hear. She opened it slowly. It was a gold-plated compass, engraved with the words, "Let your heart guide you, always." Her eyes welled up again, but this time it was not from sadness. It was from hope. Reporters tried to ask what Trump had whispered. The girl simply smiled and said, "He told me that faith is not about power. It is about love." That single moment redefined everything. News anchors who once criticized him softened their tone. Faith leaders from different religions praised the act. And across the nation, families gathered to watch that short clip again. Not because of who Trump was, but because of what he chose to be in that moment. For many, it was just a conversation. For others, it was healing. But for that little girl, it was the day she believed that her voice mattered. And maybe, just maybe, the world heard her. Outside the church, as people slowly began to leave, no one rushed, no one argued. It was like time itself had paused, allowing everyone to take in what had just happened. The girl's parents hugged her tightly, overwhelmed not only by the moment, but by the realization that her quiet voice had reached the loudest man in the country and changed him. A news outlet later aired an exclusive interview with the little girl and her mother. When asked why she had chosen that question, the girl simply said, "Because I wanted to know if someone so powerful still believes in something bigger than himself." The clip went viral. Millions watched, not for controversy, but for comfort. The story of a girl who asked a pure question and a man who gave her a human answer reminded people across the country that beyond politics, titles, and judgment, there is still space for connection, kindness, and truth. And for once, everyone was talking not about what divided them, but what brought them together. In the days that followed, something remarkable happened. Letters began pouring into the church from across the country, strangers writing to say how that little girl's question had moved them, how her courage reminded them of their own faith or their lost innocence. People from every walk of life, Christians, skeptics, single mothers, veterans, even former critics of Trump, were sharing the same message. We needed that. The little girl's moment had done what few speeches, tweets, or campaigns ever could. It had united people, if only for a moment, around something real. Not political power, not wealth, not fame, but a single honest question and a raw, unfiltered answer. And as for Trump, days later, during a speech, he paused mid-sentence, glanced at the crowd and quietly said, "A little girl reminded me this week that sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths." The audience fell silent, then broke into applause. Because in a world obsessed with shouting, it was a whisper that had left everyone speechless.